Hi everyone, has just joined. Let's just give maybe one more minute. I think people are probably just going to be leaving the last meetings and jumping onto this one. So let's give everybody like just one minute or so more just to join. Welcome. Yeah, I can see people jumping in now. Let's just give everybody a minute or so to join. Welcome everyone. All right, I think the attendees is, oh yeah, we'll still, it's slowed. I think people are coming on now, but let me just begin. So welcome everybody again. So we're excited. This is the Carbon Hack 22. We're really excited to host it. It's now begun. So Carbon Hack is sponsored by GSF member organizations Accenture, Avanade, Boston Consulting Group, Globan, Goldman Sachs, Intel Corporation, ThoughtWorks, UBS, and VMware, with data generously donated by WhatTime. And we now have, I believe, over 350 hackers or participants taking part in the hackathon, and quite a few projects taking part. So this is just welcome everyone to that. Oh, Doha, were you going to say something at the start? I can't remember. Or was I going to say something at the start?
No, you'll introduce. So we'd like for you guys to write your questions in the Q&A session. Any topics, questions, anything you'd like to hear Asim, Ismail, Henry to discuss. So please write it, and then once Asim goes through the introduction, then we'll start tackling those questions.
Yeah, that's it. So unlike if you joined previous webinar live streams that we've run, we're still gonna do a bit of an intro, but yeah, as Doha said, like we've left off a lot of the time on this session just to answer your questions. So if you ask a question in the Q&A panel, we'll answer it. If there's no questions, we're just going to chat and kind of talk about some of the more frequently asked questions that we get asked anyway. But if you've got any questions, please ask them away, and we'll deal with it at the end. So yeah, we're going to talk about the hackathon overview and timeline, talk about the online session, strategy and technical support. We're going to talk a little bit about submission, judging process and criteria, and then finally we're going to end up with a Q&A, which is, as I said, most of it. So I am Asim Hussain. I'm the director of the foundation. On the call also is Henry Richardson from WhatTime, Ismail, who's a lead researcher at the foundation, and is that it? Is it Dan? Okay, those are the people. And Dan from the hackathon, the actual open source working group. He's one of the team members building the Carbon Aware SDK itself. So Carbon Hack is about building software that can reduce the amount of carbon emissions generated through software using the new Carbon Aware API. So the carbon awareness is all about building software that does less when electricity is dirty and does more when the electricity is clean. And I apologize for reiterating stuff. We'll zoom through this and we'll get to the Q&As as quickly as possible. But just for the people who haven't been to one of these sessions before, your project can be written in any language. The only criteria is it must leverage, the Carbon Aware SDK, the API that we've got. It may include code and it may not, but it must be open source. So it must use the SDK and API, and it must be open source. And we encourage participation of literally any type. And we're really looking for creative and innovative solutions to green software. And we'll kind of go through some of the judging criteria as well during this session. So really thank you to our sponsors. We have a prize pool of a whopping $100,000 US. So the third prize is $15,000. The second prize is $25,000, and the first prize is $40,000. And we also have $20,000 for smaller prizes along the way, where we're going to be recognizing, the most innovative and creative solutions, the most polished, the most ready to go, the most insightful, and just amongst other things as well. So it's not everybody is a winner, but there will be more winners than just just the first, second, and third. But first will be 40,000, second will be 25,000, third will be 15,000. And just so we're clear, each team has to nominate I've forgotten the exact terminology, an individual, rep. a rep where the money will go to, that one rep. And that rep is responsible for distributing that money amongst the team. So pick your rep carefully. Getting started with a project. So you can publish a project and continue to work on it until November the 4th. November the 4th is the last day you'll have to submit your project on November the 4th. So there's kind of two ways you really can take part right now. You can either publish a project, and even though we've started, you can still publish a project. Our only goal is you have to submit a project by November the 4th. You didn't had to have started it before October the 13th, our official start date. You just have to have submitted it by November the 4th. Excuse me. So you can go to the Taikai website and publish a project, create a project, or you can join an existing project. So you can go to the open positions on our Hackathon website, and you can either do one of those two things. Those are pretty much the only ways of getting involved right now. And I also recommend joining the Carbon Hack 22 channel, I think it's called, on Discord. That's where a lot of us are communicating right now.
Awesome. I'm going to quickly step in. There's a question from Tobias. Our project is still in draft. When must it be published? What are the requirements for publishing? I feel like that fits in well to this slide. That's
a very good point. Yeah. So yes, so it must be obviously published before November the 4th. Once you publish, your project page will be your submission. So you have to have it published. It can't be in draft. Once you publish, it'll appear publicly on the website, and on there you must have a text pitch, and also a video pitch. So that is what you must. That is what the submission must have: a text pitch and a video pitch. And there is details in the resourcing section on the Taikai website. If anybody wants to jump in and correct me if I'm saying anything wrong, I will say in addition to that, we are offering. We have a video producer, Matt, who we've hired. And he's available to help you produce, production quality pitch videos. But in order to even click the button to get an appointment with Matt, you must have actually published your project as well, and you must have a text pitch at least at that point. So if you want to do your own video and do everything yourself, as long as it's published like at the second, but by November the 4th, that's fine. If you want to get some of the additional support with video producers, you must have it published prior to submitting for some time with a video producer. Is there anything else? Anybody else want to loop in? Have I missed anything else? Any other characteristic?
I wanted to add that in terms of publishing, there are no criteria. The earlier you publish, the more visibility you have, and the more visibility you have from us. So if new support ideas come, then they'll be focused on people who are publishing. And when you publish, it's not final. So you can publish your idea now, and if it evolves in the next 2 weeks and it changes completely, you can change it. You're not tied. It's still in a sense a draft, but it's a public draft. And the other thing that publishing allows you to do is to invite collaborations and open positions. You don't have to, you can do it solo, or you might have your complete team, but basically we encourage you to have it published because the chances of support are greater. You don't have to do it until the very end, but also if you do it early, you're not tied to it, you can change it at any point.
I said, Doha, did you
I was just going to say that we will be sending an email out next week with more information about that video offer. It's limited to 30 videos, and project needs to meet a certain criteria before they can get this offer. So as Asim said, see your project to be able to assess if you qualify for this offer. We have another question as well. If you guys want to, regarding demo application and how that should be expected in the end.
I'll read the question out for the recording. So from Maximilian, how do you expect the demo application to be in the end? Does the demo application need to be completely running online, or is it acceptable to run certain parts locally to show the concept in the video and the textual pitch? I actually feel, maybe Ismail, maybe you would you mind jumping in? I feel you might have a better handle on that, on the answer to that question here.
Sure. So I think what you have to keep in mind is the judging criteria that Asim will return to in a minute. But your goal is to convince the jury that your app is feasible, it's scalable, and it will make a difference. So that means that you don't have to have a perfectly running app. It doesn't even necessarily have to go online, but if it's just in your machine, it will obviously limit the ability of other people to interact with it. That might still be okay if it's, you know, really amazing and the concept is good and your pitch is good and you convince the jury that what you've demonstrated in your local machine is going to take off. That's fine. So it's up to you to decide. There are no hard requirements on format, and it doesn't have, nobody expects completion. They want proof of concept. They want to be able to have a sense when they look at your app that, I see what this could do and I see how this could be implemented. Within that, it's up to you. If it's only in your machine, then obviously your pitch will have to do harder work because the judges won't be able to interact with it. But it might still be powerful enough, especially what it's measuring is your machine. You know, some of the solutions are meant to measure machines. So it depends on your use case.
Yep, and this is one of the reasons why we wanted to offer the video production, because, you know, the goal is for you to convince people. We want to support you in that endeavor. So awesome. So keep the questions coming, please. This is the point of this session. If you don't ask questions, it's going to be an awkward conversation between all of us. Must not. We'll be fine. So in terms of the timeline, so again, so the hackathon has started, but that does not stop you from launching a project right now. The only thing is the 4th of November. You have to have submitted by the deadline for submission is midnight at GMT, 4th of November. So we're running live sessions. So this is the 20th, and then we'll run 2 more. And then, of course, there'll be the submission deadline on the 4th, and then we're going to have the judging will happen between the 4th and the 10th, and there'll be an award ceremony on the 10th. We're running an event, a separate event, online event called the Decarbonized Software event, which will be an online event on the 10th, and part of that event will have an award ceremony for the Carbon Hack, and we'll also be announcing some of the really cool things as well that the foundation is doing during that event. So in terms of timeline, like immediately after the 4th, we're going to do there'll be an initial shortlisting, and then the shortlisted, we're all going to be judged on the same criteria, but the shortlisted items will go to a final set of judges on the 7th, and well, we'll know the winners by the 9th, but everybody else will know the winners by the 10th. Again, projects that do not utilize the Carbon Aware, the Carbon Aware SDK and API will not be considered. So you must use the SDK, and it must be open source again. Again, and you're already doing it, but keep on asking your questions in the Q&A section. If you have any questions, any question, just ask it away, and we'll discuss it online. But I think there's a couple of other things. Yes. Okay. So yes, we mentioned before, after this event, we have two more live sessions. We have one on the 27th and one on the 3rd. And the rest of these sessions will be very similar format to this one, an introduction like me, and and just an opportunity to ask questions, and we'll answer them. And we'll just adjust as we go along. And so in terms of strategy and technical support, this is the first ever carbon aware hackathon ever in the entire world. Like, not many of us will know what carbon awareness is, how to use this stuff. You're going to need help and support. That's why we're here. So throughout this kind of 3-week hacking period, we'll offer strategy and technical support to help you perfect your submission. The best way, honestly, is to reach out to us through Discord. But feel free, or it's to reach out to Discord or sign up to these sessions and ask your questions here. And we also have developers and researchers on the bench who can help you with who are familiar with the API, can help you with your approaches to carbon aware computing. Yes. So at the end of the 3-week hacking period, we're going to close submissions on 4th of November. All projects, what actually do you have to submit? All projects are submitted via a pitch. All pitches will include a video, a video presentation and a written submission. And both components must be submitted by midnight Friday, November the 4th. So that is both a written submission and a video pitch. How to wow us with your video. So the video must be a maximum of 2 minutes long. Structure your video to clearly convey the problem, the solution, what you accomplish, and your next steps. We suggest dedicated about 30 seconds each to each of these sections. Don't waste your time doing a walkthrough. 2 minutes is not enough time. Don't waste your time doing a walkthrough. Focus on the highest value features first. That will matter the most from a kind of a user experience and just helping people to understand, the nature of your product. How to wow us with the written submission. Don't leave the written component to the last minute. That's our advice. If needed, download the GSF template PowerPoint. It's in the resources tab on the Taikai website. There's a resources tab. Go look at it. That's a template, and you can use that to help you kind of flesh out your pitch. Start drafting answers to the following questions now, as they will come up during your development. What problem is my project solving? What is the solution? What have I and the team accomplished during the hackathon? What is the solution's impact on the industry? What actions and resources are required to continue the project? We don't want you to stop. What actions are required to continue the project? What is the value of the solution? Now, include the URL to the prototype if you have one, or your GitHub, or whatever, really, and a link to your YouTube video. So that's kind of what the written submission will need to contain. So this is how you're going to be judged. You're going to be judged on the written submission and the video, right? If judges want to, they can click in and click on things and examine stuff, but that's really the primary things you're going to be judged on. These are our judges. We have incredible judges from, all these people are involved in sustainable technology and green software in these organizations. So projects we evaluated on vision, feasibility, and impact on a 5-point scale, which I think is the next one. Here we go. So these are the 3 criteria your solution is going to be judged by: vision, feasibility, and impact. Vision. What do we mean by vision? So our judges want to be inspired. They're looking for innovation. Luckily for you, there aren't many examples of carbon aware software, so chances are your project is already visionary. To score well here, know how your project compares to kind of other carbon aware projects out there and what sets it apart from the rest. What is your vision for this project? How is it different? What is the future with your project existing? What do we mean by feasibility? So judges are looking for a convincing proof of concept, prototype, not a fully working solution that does everything you want it to accomplish. So just focus on the proof of concept. Judges will evaluate how easy or hard it is to get a minimum viable product post hackathon. Okay, so that's what they're really looking at. They're going to assume you've got a proof of concept. How would you get to minimum viable product? Is it possible to get to minimum viable product? So improve your chances to score high by making sure your pitch and video offer indications of an implementation roadmap. Not just here's what I've done, here's how I would take this proof of concept and turn it into an MVP. And what are the requirements to get your project to production, and add any future features you may want to have to realize your vision. And the last criteria is impact. So can your product make a real difference? Does it have potential for wide adoption? So projects that provide convincing evidence of impact will receive high impact scores from the judges. For example, shaving 1 gram of carbon in a single web page is just not that much. But if that web page was visited 100,000 times a day, that would be a saving of 36 tons per year. So it might seem like it has a small impact, but actually when you scale up, it has a big impact. So alternatively, it could be a solution with just like low adoption. It's not going to have that many users, but the impact per user is going to be really, really high. So for every ton of chlorine, 2 tons of CO2 produced from electricity consumed alone. So 1 plant can produce 1 million tons of chlorine a year. So if just 1 plant became carbon aware, you might reduce CO2 emissions by 1 to 2 million tons per year. So impact. So I think that's it. Here are the links, just FYI. I think we've got a couple of questions there. I think there was a question here, which I think Dan wanted to answer, didn't he? So there's a question from Chaitra Bhatt. Best way to get an overview of the software of the Carbon Aware SDK. Dan, would you mind coming online? And I know you're typing an answer, but let's give the answer to everybody.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, so I was trying to give an answer on the side. I was just saying that maybe if you haven't attended the webinar last week or the previous weeks, feel free to go back through that. I was just trying to get the link from YouTube to provide it straight away. So that might be a good way of getting the overview at this stage.
You also have, I believe, a video, Dan, don't you, on the Taikai website itself? I've forgotten which page it's on. It's not on the overview page. It's on maybe the resources page.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, that video is mainly around running the API from local machine. I think in this case, It seems to be more about the functionality. So that's why I thought maybe it's best to go to the webinar. But in essence, the SDK provides you with the ability to, query some APIs that provide carbon intensity metrics, mainly from what time. And then that's kind of the purpose of the SDK, helping you, go to a single place and get information in the future, potentially from lots of different sources. But obviously, if you've got any more questions after you've watched the video, feel free to reach out on Discord, and feel free to tag me straight away. My handle in there is Danu, DANUW. So, I'll be happy to try and bridge the gaps that we might have from documentation somewhere.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so now we're at the question section. We have one question from Joita. I apologize if I'm pronouncing everybody's names wrong. I'm going to read it out. Or do we bring them on, Doha, or should I just read them out? I'll start reading it out.
Read them out, yeah.
Okay. So how accurate are the forecast endpoints in comparison to querying the historical endpoints? For instance, how much more accurate is it to keep querying with the emissions by location best endpoint to continuously get the recent carbon rating versus calling emissions forecast current only once to forecast the carbon ratings for the next few hours? Oh, I see the question. Okay. I don't know the exact numbers, just whether the difference accuracy is significant or not. So the question is, that's probably more a question for Henry, this, isn't it? Like, how accurate are the forecasts and the versus the currents?
Absolutely. This is a lovely and very complex question.
We've got time.
Oh, yes. So we don't actually necessarily always measure accuracy of our forecast. We tend to use an efficacy metric. So how effective is this forecast at enabling the dynamic load shifting or the timing-based optimization that you want to do? So the rank order is more important than the exact magnitude in the forecast. And we update our forecast every 5 minutes. That's both the 24-hour and the 72-hour, which you can get through the API. but it doesn't necessarily change significantly between timestamps. So you might be able to get the 24-hour forecast, use that for the next 24 hours, but get the real-time value to know how accurate that forecast is. And then in a couple hours or an hour or two, get a new forecast, and then during that period, get the real-time value. So the real-time value will probably have more variability than the true forecast. Curtailment, dynamic grid conditions are very hard to predict. So some forecasts are better than others, depending on the grid region and the conditions there. For example, the Great Plains of the United States has a lot of wind and thus a lot of wind curtailment. That's very hard to predict, but we're pretty good at identifying. We think it's going to occur in these couple of hours. And then in CAISO, California, solar is much more predictable. We know that it's more likely to occur in the middle of the day, and thus when curtailment is likely to happen, our forecasts tend to be better there. This raised another interesting question. Oh, in Discord, I think I saw a question related to what features do you use in our forecasts? And we use both historical data, so what happened in the past, as well as forecasted grid information from the grid operators around price, load, generation. And then we also use all kinds of weather conditions. So we use as many features as we can to kind of make that forecast as accurate as we can. It is a separate model, so they're two separate processes. We have a model for identifying what the marginal emissions rate is, and then a different model for predicting what that will be over the next 24 or 72 hours. That was a very long answer to your question, Jarita, but did it begin to address it?
Could I ask you to elaborate a bit more on the difference between precision and efficacy?
Accuracy and efficacy, yes, absolutely. So accuracy would be how close to the predicted value did you get the forecast to be? And efficacy is, if I have an hour of load that I can schedule in the next hour, or sorry, over the next 24 hours, if I use the forecast compared to perfect foresight, if you do this in the past, how close are my actual savings to the ideal savings? And so we, of course, care most about the actual effect of those decisions. So we want that effectiveness to be as high as possible. How well did we identify the low emissions periods?
So if I may put an example in, for instance, into place, like if someone was doing some location shifting in North America, and they used the forecast to schedule all that beforehand, your goal is to ensure that any decisions they made about where they run them are the right decisions. The actual numbers might not rack up to what really happened, but as long as the decision to move it to California was the right decision, then that's your intention. Okay, is this because I don't know, we can spend ages on this. I find this quite interesting, but it's just me and you, Henry, though. So so can we touch then, and Ismail and Dan, a couple of everybody on this call. So what is, I think this is related, I suppose, in a way to this is the marginal versus average a conversation, I presume, or you tell me if it's presume, because I can imagine predicting average is probably going to be more precise, but predicting marginal is quite challenging because you're talking about kind of step changes over short distances. Is that kind of where it's coming from? Yeah.
To some degree, I think it's actually related philosophically.
Okay.
We want to know what is the best choice you can make from an environmental standpoint. So that's how we build our forecasts.
Yeah.
We also want to know what is the best choice you can make, like how to best measure the impact of your actions. And that is through the marginal emissions rate, because if you add load in a particular region, not all the power plants in that region will respond to that change in load. The nuclear power plant, unless you're in France, will stay perfectly flat. Mm-hmm. And some fossil plant, it is likely will respond to that change. And so we want to know, if you make a decision, what is the direct effect of that decision, and can we measure the effect of that decision? Yeah.
Which I think is quite an important philosophical point. No, not philosophical point. I don't know if that's the right term. Maybe it is the right term, but it's it's the because I saw recently an organization describe in terms of green software. I thought it was a very useful. I thought it was a very good term, and I told them straight away I was going to steal it. It was a very good term. It was measuring for reporting and measuring for action. And I've been struggling. I know we've spoken about this. We've struggled to kind of like express this idea that you can measure for reporting, but that might not give you that the measuring methodology used for reporting might actually not give you the right signals to give the best outcomes in the world, whereas measuring for action is, so I would say average marginal is measuring for reporting. But if your intention isn't just to report, if your intention is to take actions, you use marginal. And that's kind of I just found that a useful way that I found this organization was describing, and I think it's something that I'm at least going to use moving forward. Yeah,
absolutely. We find that heuristic very useful. We also have heard it called accounting and impact. So action or measurement and action, they're kind of different panels. We're trying to bring those closer together, but we really want to kind of like, this is an action-oriented spec. How do we make, or an action-oriented hackathon, how do we make software greener through our actions and reduce emissions in the atmosphere?
Yeah. But I think this is where it's important, because I think marginal gives you the intention with marginal is, if you were to make a choice, how does that choice have the best impact to carbon emissions around the world? And I think that's kind of the interesting thing, whereas average is useful if you're doing reporting, because averages sum up to a total. And when you're doing accounting, you want things to sum up to total. You want column A to sum up to column B, and then that it works from that perspective, but it might not give you the right signal to actually reduce emissions. I think we need to. This is something I think we need to. It's an understanding about the green software space. I think there needs to be a spread. So you have a follow-up question. Again, I think this is you. I haven't read it. From Yusuf. A follow-up question to the historical versus forecast. Would you advise using the average endpoint? The average endpoint for monitoring related applications, say 30 minutes average, or call every 5 minutes to get the readings? I don't think I quite. Do we have an average emissions endpoint? Is that what that's asking?
I think this is an averaging of the marginal emissions rate across that 30 minutes.
Okay.
Yusuf, that's another interesting question. I think it depends on the choice available to you. Some processes must run for an hour, so you can't break them up. So using the average of the hour that you intend to run it in will tell you the impact of that. The average of the marginal emissions rate in that hour will tell you the impact of that. But if you can chop that up, then you want to use the more granular one to spread it out and schedule it more intelligently. A good example of this might be a dishwasher's got to run its whole cycle in an hour. You can't break that up. But a car charger, you could break up the 3-hour charge into 30-minute chunks and spread it out over time, because it doesn't need to be running contiguously.
I think that's also a great example of measuring for reporting and measuring for action, because you can take an action with the car charger one. You can't take an action with the washing machine one.
With the washing machine or dishwasher, you might be able to delay it.
Yes.
But it still has to be
a contiguous chunk. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So they're still actionable in both those cases.
Along those lines, one question that someone asked was, what is a good interval in terms of how much does sort of electricity vary? So if you checked every 5 minutes compared to every 15 to every half an hour, how much can you expect your reading to be predictive of the next chunk? So if it's every 15 minutes, would you be able to say, okay, it's safe to assume that for the next 15 minutes, this zone is the greenest, versus for the next 5 minutes versus for the next hour?
I would really look at the forecast in that situation, because you can get step changes where you switch from a fossil resource to a clean resource, and the emissions rate can vary pretty significantly, 5 minutes to 5 minutes, but you don't know when that change could occur. So use like forward filling the forecast with the current value is not always effective, but it is probably okay. You start losing that variability as you start stretching that over longer periods.
So again, in terms of times, I guess you have two options. One is I check every 5 minutes, and another one is I check for a 15-minute forecast or for an hour forecast every hour or every 15 minutes. When would you make that jump from polling to averaging?
Interesting. So one compromise that we've seen that has been very effective is you get the forecast and you create a threshold. Like so in the next 3 hours, I know I need to run for an hour. And that creates a threshold above which you shouldn't run and below which you should run. And then you take the real-time value, which you get every 5 minutes, and you compare it to that threshold. And so it's an intelligently adjusting threshold. And then in an hour or two, you readjust that threshold based on the forecast. So it's a more dynamic, you're kind of mixing the value of the real-time signal with the value of the forecast if you want to reduce your data burden. Or let's say you really only want to turn on that device every 15 minutes, maybe polling every 15 minutes is appropriate, and comparing that to the forecast, which you poll every 3 hours. So I would say better match to your needs, to your device or hardware specific needs is most appropriate.
Thank you.
I think Doha has a hand up.
Yeah, I have about 7 questions that were written in the FAQ document by participants that couldn't be here today. So it's in the chat, not in the Q&A.
Gotcha. Okay, I'll read them out. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So first question is a quick explanation of how to interpret the number. For example, higher is better or worse. What does it mean if one value is 10 and another is 20? That's double the emissions. Twice as good energy-wise? What does good mean? I couldn't find that on the GitHub page. Well, lower is better is the direct thing. So lower, Henry, why don't you answer that question?
Absolutely. So the units are in emissions mass per unit of energy. So I believe in the Wattime API, it's pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour. That might be, I believe that's different. Dan, can you confirm in the
kilos
SDK?
or grams?
Yeah, I think we're converting it to grams per kilowatt hour, so we can have something that's consistent when we integrate to other providers.
That makes sense.
The answer is that the number refers to grams. So the higher the number, the more CO2 emissions there are per watt. So the more polluting it is, and the lower the number, the less grams you're generating of emissions in a simple way.
So you want to shift or move load to the lowest numbers possible.
Yeah. And it directly means carbon. It directly means carbon emissions. So yeah, so it's the lowers are better, and it directly relates to carbon emissions. Second question. I also wasn't sure if it was computed in the SDK or if it comes directly from Wattime or copied verbatim. I am looking in the wrong. If I'm looking in the wrong place, could you please point me to the right direction? So I think this person is actually looking at the SDK code itself, and probably needs a little bit of explanation as to the difference between the SDK, the API, and the Wattime API. Maybe, I mean, is that something, Dan, you maybe want to, Dan? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess just one more thing maybe on the first one. On the previous question, just one more thing I wanted to add as well is a good probably is better, you know, like as you said, if it's less, maybe it's good also sometimes to think about what Henry was saying earlier about having a threshold and thinking I'm below that threshold, so it's good. And in some cases, it's also about what's my usual load, and now that I'm going to be carbon aware, how do I make it better? Even if you reduce it by 1%, it's actually really good. So maybe use that in practice to assess whether it's good or bad.
And
yeah.
and the API was like it's built in a way where you can look at it, you can examine your historical workloads and see what the average emissions you were consuming was. So you're right, actually that's probably what you should be doing, because I think that's how you designed it, isn't it? So
yeah, so with the two API, the different endpoints, obviously the endpoints that are about getting the ratings in the past would help you assess whether you could have been more efficient in the past however many months or how many days or years, even however far the API goes, and how much, depending on how much data you already have about your consumption or about when you've run jobs and for how long. And maybe that can help you, maybe create a business case also sometimes in scenarios where you can't action things directly, and you have to create a business case for different areas of the business to do that. In terms of the second question, I think funny enough, we also kind of alluded to it, but the SDK sort of acts as a bit of a broker in this case, especially when it's about getting information from different data sources. And so in the case of WhatTime, for example, there is a little transformation that's happening, so we can convert from pounds to gram. But I'm not necessarily aware of that much more. And I think it's worth highlighting that at the moment this is the first release. The idea behind the first release is that we finally had a scenario where we could do something that actually has an impact. And so for a lot of customers or a lot of companies out there, there are a lot of jobs that are running on a regular basis, and being able to just shift those jobs by a few hours, by a few minutes, or to, as you said, Henry, maybe running them in small chunks at different times so that it's more efficient overall. That's what the SDK really can provide right now, but also we're after improving it and bringing more functionality and trying to fit into more business scenarios that we couldn't to date. And I think on that point, I think there's another question that's been asked, and I'm just going to try and link it to this as well. I think it said, yes, I think it said something about, why does the emissions by location best endpoint not include the name of the location in its response? We've got some issues on that, and those are things that we want to address going forward to make it more unified and easier to use. But at the moment, we haven't basically managed to get around to that. So if you have time and you can create a pull request for this, feel free to do that. Anything that improves the SDK is useful in this case. And yeah, just as an example, I've seen that Ismail's got his hand up, so I'll pass on to him for now.
Oh, well, yeah, I was going to say that I think what Dan is saying, it's worth understanding more generally what the vision of the API and the SDK is. That you normally, at the moment, if you are interacting with the API via the API that has been sort of kindly made available for free to all of us, then you are just connecting to the WhatTime API under it. But the SDK is meant to be able to connect to lots of different APIs, to your own static data sets. And that means that every single one of those will have slightly different formats, slightly different information. So the SDK is a translator. It's not just a layer that gets you to talk to WhatTime. It's a translator for all of the various data sets. So say WhatTime covers a particular geographic area, and you're interested in a different area that's not covered by that, by WhatTime. You can already use the SDK and run it with your own data set locally, although you may need to also do some transformations. But the idea is that this is an ongoing process and an ongoing tool that will increasingly make it possible to engage with a huge variety of data sources. And WhatTime is just the starting gun, as it were.
It also, I would like to highlight, I think it also draws insights that is not available in the raw data, like pick the best time or location is a is insights that are built on top of the data sets that are not available in the from the raw data itself.
Yeah, and I think also like one of the if I may, like one of the if I look at how Google implemented their carbon aware work, they've got a paper on it, their carbon aware data center work, a couple of years ago now. In order to pick the best location, carbon intensity was only one of the inputs of that equation. They wanted to factor in kind of other inputs. I've always imagined that's how the carbon aware SDK would work. Like you can factor in like I'm not sure, I haven't got my thinking hat on, but like other inputs can flow into that, not just purely the carbon intensity of electricity. There's other things that you need to take into consideration when you're making these decisions, and you can do that. And yeah, I think that's one of the. And also the final thing I want to say, yes, there are things that need to be changed in the SDK. It's open source, as Dan suggested. We have prizes. I believe one of the smaller prizes will be for contributions to the SDK itself. So if you do want to make a contribution back to the SDK, not only will that be appreciated, but there will also be a prize for that. So we want to encourage a lot of that. And linked to that, there's another question, which was a kind of a similar thing, which is why is there not? Why can you? Is there a reason why the endpoint doesn't accept latitude and longitude for a location? Is there a specific reason for that, Dan? Or
I think it's related to the data source. Yeah, I think it's related to data source. I believe, and maybe Henry can comment further on that, that the locations are kind of regions. They're not necessarily specific points. So let's just say you want to understand the carbon intensity in the north of England as opposed to the south of England, for example. I think England at the moment comes up as one region, and therefore there isn't necessarily a difference. So at the moment, the data source is configured to translate those names of known data centers into locations. Now, obviously, this is just one use case. The one use case, if you think slightly, if you kind of like take a step back on what the SDK currently offers, is I want to run this in a data center. In this case, it's an Azure data center. How do I know the intensity? And so we convert that name, that well-known names of regions such as UK West or East US, etc., into coordinates that then we can pass on to WhatTime. But then again, feature improvement, like I want to get it per location, let's do that. But I think there's the truth is there is a lot we can do, and we just obviously try to focus on what we could to get the first version out. But it's a very good question, and obviously things that we'll want to have in the future. So thank you for the question.
It's possible. There's a prize. We can make it happen. But there's if you want to contribute to that to the SDK, there may even be a prize for that. So, Henry, did you want to?
There is an endpoint in the WhatTime API that lets you convert, that lets you identify grid region from lat long. So,
okay.
So if that is a feature that wants to be added to the SDK, that should be something that
But for now,
we should encourage folks to make.
Yeah. So there's one question here I just want to very quickly answer in the thing. I think there's a couple of other questions we can just zoom through. But Yusuf's asking, in order to compute the software carbon intensity, how can one obtain the embodied emissions of hardware? I am going to encourage you. I will have to actually share this in the chat. But if you look for cloud, in fact, no, I think Doha, I'm gonna prematurely share the SCI data project. It does have a live link at the top. But if you want to go, we are collecting some information. This is a draft project. It will change. Do not share it. If you share it at your own risk. Use it at your own risk. But the links may change. Everything may change on this project until it's published. So just you've had your disclaimer. But inside here, it's called sci-data.greensoftware.foundation. We're trying to get information around, help answer these questions. where do you get the embodied? Where are good sources for embodied emissions from hardware? So if you go to here, there's some hints into here what to do. It's very rough. It hasn't even gone through a technical author yet, and the structure may change. So use at your own risk, but there is the data there right now. So I think that's a good answer to that question.
I think I can also comment on that. So there are a number of approaches to it. So one approach is to guesstimate, as it were. So for example, the Sustainable Web Design group, using research, they estimate that sort of production is about 19% of emissions, end user is about 52% of emissions. And so they get the figure from the data transfer, and then they add that percentage to estimate the embodied carbon. There are other approaches. So another approach that I think we've discussed is when you actually measure specifically the electricity. I think your project was looking at machines directly. So if you are, some people have, for example,
I think this question was specifically on an embodied carbon, not electricity measurement.
Yes, but what I'm saying is that at the moment, the embodied carbon takes into account both sides, the manufacture, the use, and the e-waste, because you don't generally have visibility for that one in that sense. So it's about how you disaggregate that into more detail. Yeah,
I think if you go to here, I think especially if you go to this link here, if you go to this page, go to this link, this is going to be a great resource, because this is a lot of this already been calculated by the Cloud Carbon Footprint tool, and you can see here they've got they've got the emissions data here, so you can a place for you to look at there as well. So there's that data as well. Let me just quickly, a couple of minutes to go. There's just a couple more questions in the chat. I want to make sure we go to it. Is there just one balancing authority per location, or can there be more than one? Henry.
Ideally, there's only one grid entity serving an area. It is so commonly, yes. When we've worked as hard as we can to identify which grid region any location is located in. Very occasionally, there's some overlapping complexity that we probably don't need to get into here, but generally speaking, there is one grid entity, one balancing authority, one ISO, TSO, whatever it is, serving a particular region. And I do want to make a distinction here. We are not talking about your utility or electricity provider. So let's say you're in the UK and you have Octopus Energy as your retail energy provider. We're not measuring the emissions intensity of that. We are we are measuring the emissions intensity of the entire grid and the operator who manages all of the assets on the grid. Even if you were to switch from Octopus to someone else, the mix of electricity on the grid wouldn't change because they would just buy or sell more power in the market.
The UK is a weird one because we have like 40 retail and one provider. Anyway, so that thing, so we have 66 questions. Question 6, I think it's related to what you just said. So I have a question about the What Time API. There was no distinction in the data returned by the API for different regions in the UK. Does this mean there's only one single authority reporting data for the entire region of the UK? Is there a way of getting region-specific data for the UK?
Currently, we report a single emissions value for the entirety of the UK. We are looking into understanding congestion and how power flows within the UK to identify subregions, but that's a kind of a future, more complex project.
And that's because like the UK is on one grid. It's one grid. So even though the location regions you can query are in different locations, they're on the same grid, which is kind of like, what it's all about. Whereas in the US, you'll have, the US has lots more grids. So if
This is a little bit larger. I believe Elexon is the entity that manages the grid in the UK and balances to ensure power is getting delivered.
Okay. And the last question from the ones we got asked in the chat, I believe, is what is the range of what is considered clean versus dirty energy? Is there a standard, or is it relative to the average emission of a certain place?
Also a very good question. It depends on what action is available to you. So if you have to go back to the EV example, your EV is going to only charge in one grid region typically. So what matters to you there is the relative difference between high and low. So the absolute value matters less than the relative values between different times. So if you're thinking about shifting in time, relative intensity matters more. If you're thinking about shifting in space between regions, the absolute intensity between two different locations matters more. And again, it's constrained by the choice available to you. Let's say you must have your data center in the US for data sovereignty reasons, or probably more common in the EU. Then the range of choices available to you is only in the US or the EU. And so you should look at the minimum and maximum. And is there even a data center in the place where you are able to shift to? So it's really, the range is constrained by your choice. That's a wishy-washy answer.
Well, no, but I think maybe it's worthwhile just raising, because I think one of the really interesting things about it can go theoretically to infinity, but the lowest number is 0. So I suppose that's the best number you're going to get is 0 grams of carbon because of curtailment, which is when you throw away clean electricity, which I think is something that I'm not sure we've really covered in much detail, Henry, but that is, there's, from what we understand, that there's more and more moments where clean energy is getting thrown away, where wind power is getting thrown away. And at those moments, the marginal carbon intensity goes to 0. So if you're looking at the line, as soon as you're throwing away clean energy, it goes to 0 and it goes back up again. So these are the perfect, pristine moments of shifting. So you know the best number, which is 0, put it that way. And there will be moments of 0.
In some regions.
In some regions, yeah. In some regions.
Or if you could move it all to Iceland, which I don't think has any fossil generation left.
Oh, really? Is it 100% renewable? 100%.
Yeah, but it's also not a large grid, so
okay.
it's not interconnected with anyone else.
Okay. Oh, interesting. I think that's it. Dan, I saw you write something in the chat. Is that a question for the audience? Is that a question for us? Or is that like...
That was both. I was looking at the screen and I just wanted to double check that my understanding is correct, because there's so many notations. Just looking at the screen where it says in the middle kilogram CO2 equivalent, I just wanted to know if we can assume that that's the same as saying kilogram per watt hour.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Or not. I just because I suppose people will be wondering what those what those units are, and if they are the exact same as the one that we've described on the SDK homepage.
Absolutely not. So that reports the total emissions caused by creating that hardware.
I see. Yeah.
The SDK is emissions per unit of electricity. So they're kind of, one's a rate and one's a quantity.
Okay. So equivalent means it's the total. Okay.
Equivalent means it includes other pollutants.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Is there anything else anybody wants to raise? We're almost at time. Ismail, Dan, Henry, you lost.
I guess the main thing I would raise is more kind of practical, which is that for those of you who are here, now is the time to begin to project plan, to think ahead to your milestones. So by when do you have to have a pitch, and by when you have to have a video pitch? Probably by then it would be good to have some form of proof of concept in your project. So how much time do you have? Are your plans in line with that, or do you need to make them smaller to ensure that you have something to present? Always remembering that actually having something to offer is better than having something very ambitious you don't finish. So this is a time to think about it with your team, to kind of calendarize and say, this week we want to get to here. Maybe we're going to plan an intensive weekend, however it is that you want to do it. But now is the time to begin to move, to think backwards from the end, as opposed to up to now where it's been about what are we going to build. Now it's more sort of how are we going to land it? And that's, I think that would be the last thing I would leave you with.
Yeah, great, very good point. And remember, everybody, what you have to submit is a video pitch and a text pitch. So, as Ismail says, like, think about that now. Think about that now. Okay, I think we're at time. Don't see any more questions in the Q&A sessions. So good luck, everybody. We're really excited, all of us actually, to see all the interest from everybody in the hackathon, and we're really excited to see what everybody produces. So good luck, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
All right. Thanks, Doha. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Henry. Thanks.